It's London in 1720, and you've just been mugged. Your father's watch, your billfold, and some letters you'd rather keep private, all gone. So you head to the Old Bailey, London's criminal court, where Jonathan Wilde, Thief-Taker General, finder of stolen property, and city's top law enforcement figure, keeps his office. Days later, his agents have discovered your belongings. Wilde negotiates a price to release your valuables, and you pay off the robbers in an anonymous meetup. Wilde returns your goods and accepts only a small fee for this service. And you thank heaven that the city has a crime fighter the likes of Thief-Taker General Wilde. But ask around the right circles, and you may hear a different story. They say that all of the city's thieves, from the housebreakers to the highwaymen, have a master. One who controls the pickpockets who work Drury Lane, the starglazers who cut open shop windows, the dazzlers, the wig stealers, the anglers, and the footpads. And that shadowy figure is also Jonathan Wilde. Between 1680 and 1720, London experienced an unprecedented crime wave. Surging populations, deep poverty, and legions of discharged soldiers created an underclass trying to survive in an economy that was rapidly transitioning to capitalism, a system they didn't wholly understand. But ironically, this new economy also provided ways for the desperate and enterprising to live off its underbelly, because a dazzling array of manufactured commercial goods appeared on the scene, products that could easily be stolen and anonymously sold, and a new era of thievery was born. To combat this, the English rewrote their penal codes, structuring them around property crime, with the value of the goods determining the punishment. The problem was, the British law enforcement system didn't have the capacity to deal with this expansion. Not to mention, the prison system simply didn't have the space. So, Parliament took another tack: deterrence. They would make the punishments so draconian, so bloody-minded, people just wouldn't steal. At times, taking goods as little as 12 pence in value carried a death sentence. "Men are not hanged for stealing horses," one politician wrote, "but that horses may not be stolen." The result was a system of laws known as the Bloody Code. Children as young as 7 were sentenced to death for stealing cups. Men went to the gallows at Tyburn over spoons and bolts of cloth. And execution days were a holiday, where people watched hanging after hanging while sitting on bleachers, the better to see the costs of crime. Courts sentenced so many to death that sympathetic judges reduced most sentences to branding on the thumb or transportation, where they sold convicts into indentured servitude in faraway colonies like America. This system of terror didn't work. In fact, gangs of pickpockets would work the crowd on execution days, lifting billfolds and watches as the crowd stood in rapt attention as a different pickpocket dangled on the noose. And exacerbating the problem, London had no professional citywide police force. In fact, they disliked the concept itself. In neighboring France, professional law enforcement was an extension of the army, where citizens had little recourse against the state. The lesson the English took from this was that professional police were an inherently repressive and militarized organization, and they were better off without one. So London, now a city of 700,000, made do with an inadequate system of elderly parish watchmen, citizen arrests, and bounty hunters known as thief-takers. You see, catch and convict a thief, and the government would give you £40, a huge payday at the time, equivalent to about $7,000 today. Which is how they got Thief-Taker General Jonathan Wilde. 1710, Wood Street, Compter. Wilde's story begins, fittingly enough, in prison. He was in debt, among criminals, and had few options. Originally an apprentice bucklemaker, in his early 20s, Wilde left his wife and son and traveled to London as a servant, where he quickly lost that job and fell behind on bills. Imprisoned until he could earn his release, Wilde found himself suddenly immersed in the unfamiliar tapestry of London's underworld. For jails of the time were infamous for one thing above all others. They were a university for crime. Prisons in Georgian Britain were run for profit. Rather than rehabilitation or even confinement, the goal was to squeeze inmates for everything they could. And while imprisoned at Wood Street, Wilde had to pay rent for his cell and buy his own food. Guards loaded prisoners with chains, then extorted money for their removal, and the penniless were sent to the beggar's grate, earning their keep by pleading passers-by for coins. But the guards liked Wilde. He was smart, charming, and ruthless. So he began running errands for them, participating in their mechanisms of corruption, and studying how to extort and intimidate. He learned about criminal schemes and to use the intricate language of London's underworld. Soon, he was earning enough to start a money-lending operation among his fellow prisoners, and was let out at night to help hunt for thieves. Upon his release, Wilde was a practiced operator. He'd learned from the best, and his new girlfriend Mary Milliner, a worker in the city's sex trade, ran her own criminal gang. But best of all, he finally found his role in London's great ecosystem of crime. Wilde became a fence, buying stolen goods, removing any distinguishing marks, and selling them on. It was a role that suited him. As a fence, Wilde took on none of the risks himself and gained leverage over other thieves. And while buying stolen goods was not a crime, selling them was a different matter. That meant Wilde could squeeze the thieves themselves as much as he wanted, and if they didn't like it, or tried to go somewhere else, he'd simply sell them to the authorities. Wilde developed a reputation, and soon, a gentleman by the name of Charles Hitchin came a-callin'. A few years before, Hitchin had paid £700 to become the Under-Marshal of London, the city's top law enforcement figure. But that was just a facade. In reality, he ran an empire of extortion, demanding payoffs and services from the city's brothels, and running a prominent gang known as the Mathematicians. He would recover stolen property, and then, like Wilde, use his skills as a thief-taker to line his pockets and punish those that worked outside his operations. And now he wanted Wilde as his deputy, a man to accompany him that could intimidate underperformers, bribe aldermen, and confront owners of lost property in order to extort or blackmail them. Hitchin provided the network, Wilde the organizational skill and menace. So Wilde learned the ropes, but he didn't like it. Hitchin's operation lacked nuance, too many face-to-face meetings, greedy fees that alienated allies and targets alike, and Hitchin even sent extortion notes signed with his own name. In fact, the main reason Hitchin recruited Wilde was that he had been snared in an anti-corruption investigation. To avoid scandal, city officials had let him retain his title, but did order him to step away from his duties for at least 2 years. So Wilde, Hitchin explained, was to run the operation until Hitchin could make his glorious return. But as you can probably guess, it didn't shake out like that. As soon as Hitchin stepped away, Wilde started making changes. He took less of a cut, paying the thieves more and charging his customers less. He also stopped sending blackmail letters, and instead advertised his finds in newspapers where victims would see them. When a client seeing one of these advertisements visited his offices, he'd greet them and take notes, telling them to return in a few days. Once they did, he'd say he'd found the thieves and negotiated a ransom for the goods. But Wilde never touched money, apart from his small fee, of course. The clients paid the thieves, and the thieves then gave Wilde a cut of that money, along with the goods that he would return to the client. No evidence he'd orchestrated the whole thing. He'd even catch the thieves for an additional fee. Not his thieves, of course, but the competition's. Upon Hitchin's return, Wilde went into business for himself. He developed new avenues of crime, stealing account books and ransoming them back to businesses. He hired etiquette coaches and dancing masters to teach his pickpockets to blend in at society balls, to better make off with the guests' jewels. And, unlike Hitchin, he actually fought crime, using his gang to perform police work, and then of course loudly, publicly giving newspapermen accounts of his adventures, and the public, hungry for tales of crime and justice, lapped it up. When a gang of footpads shot and killed a gentlewoman during a botched mugging, Wilde swore revenge. His agents dragged the perpetrators in, and Wilde interrogated them until they each had incriminated the other, and revealed their hideout. His agents besieged the building, catching the final suspect going out a back window and putting a bullet in his shoulder. In another case, Wilde personally subdued an armed highwayman, tackling the man, pinning his hands, and biting his chin until he dropped his pistol. Wilde was a hero to the city, and also got very rich at the same time, clearing £400 a year. And scandal refused to stick to him, even as he expanded his criminal empire. But Charles Hitchin did not appreciate Wilde's success. Thieves increasingly deserted Hitchin's gang, fearful that Wilde would send them to the gallows unless they pledged fealty, which, to be fair, was a very realistic worry. Wilde was actively moving on Hitchin's organization, so Hitchin decided to hit back. A pamphlet appeared on the streets without warning, exposing the details of Wilde's organization. But just reading the clumsy essay, Wilde knew it was Hitchin. So, Wilde responded with his own explosive pamphlet. Not only did he expose the details of Hitchin's corruption scandal, but he also revealed Hitchin was a homosexual, regularly extorting services from the city's gay brothels. This ended Hitchin's career. Georgian society, deeply homophobic, also just assumed that Hitchin's claims about Wilde were lies. And as a sign of his victory, Wilde's pamphlet christened him with a new title, Jonathan Wilde, Thief-Taker General of Great Britain and Ireland. He was now perceived as London's defender, wearing a fine sword and keeping crime at bay, at the height of his power. But little did he know, Wilde was about to encounter his most dangerous rival, a lowly thief named Jack Shepherd, who in time would burn his corrupt empire to the ground. Special thanks to our educational tier patrons Ahmed Ziad Turk, Joseph Blaine, and Dominic Valenciana.